Heroin is the deadliest drug on the face of the planet.
It's like a mother's hug when you have it, but it's like a daddy's smack in the head when you don't have it. Wow.
It starts out a pretty poppy, but ends up a poisonous liquid injected into the veins of addicts.
It's not a party. It ends up to be pain and hurt.
The global heroin industry funds terrorism and international crime while undermining the fabric of society.
If an addict wants to be an addict, they're going to be an addict.
Put your hands up. All right.
America is at war, at home and abroad, in a desperate attempt to end heroin's worldwide reign. Producers, traffickers, dealers, users, doctors, police. They're all part of the $300 billion a year global industry that is Drugs Incorporated. Vancouver, Canada, 4 a.m. Leanne Gladue is 42 years old. She's married with 3 children.
I don't have a story of, oh, my mother hated me, my dad used to do this to me. I had great parents. In all honesty, I let them down a bit.
7 years ago, Leanne took her first hit of heroin. She's been addicted and homeless ever since.
This is my home. These are my neighbors. These are my storekeepers. This is where I live. I live in a shelter. I share a room with 2 other strangers, and I share a bathroom with 45 other people. My addiction controls me every day. It controls where I live. It controls who I see. It controls who I don't see. That's the worst part, who I don't see. I want to give up dope every single day. Every time I miss my children.
Leanne's friend, Patricia, prostitutes to support her habit.
I left home when I was 16. My dad was an alcoholic and didn't like my boyfriend, so I ended up moving out. I ended up surviving by selling marijuana on the streets. The marijuana led to cocaine, the cocaine led to heroin, and eventually selling marijuana wasn't fast enough money, so I ended up on the corner selling my body to support my heroin habit. Come on!
There's no single path to heroin addiction. Nearly a quarter of all people who try the drug eventually become addicted.
My first injection I did of heroin, within 30 days, I had my first criminal charge.
Heroin changes the way the brain works. So when an addict is deprived of the drug, they become physically sick.
I don't know how to explain it. It's like a cup of cocoa before bed and having a hot bath. That nice soothing feeling you get, the same thing. Hey, how are you? I do it first to get well, and then I do it to get high. Want some company?
Vancouver has one of the highest standards of living in the world. But the million-dollar yachts and beautiful beaches stand in stark contrast to Main Street in Hastings and the downtown east side. A 4x10 block area in the heart of Vancouver's Skid Row is home to thousands of addicts, one of the largest concentrations in North America.
We'll walk up Carnegie Alley.
Leanne's lived in the area for 7 years.
This is Carnegie Alley. More drugs are consumed, sold, bartered than any place else. I lived right here for 4 years. This was my backyard. I have looked out my window and seen a person sitting there and for $5 almost been beaten to death. I looked out my window and saw a friend of mine overdosed, ran down and saved his life. This is my alley. This is where I learned to do what I had to do, which was sell dope to support my heroin habit. How did I end up down here? I dabbled with cocaine for numerous years and was able to continue a functional lifestyle with my family and my children and my husband. Then I got sick, medically sick, was introduced with morphine, which is an opiate, and I got wired to morphine. And a doctor that prescribed me an absurd amount of morphine that, as far as I'm concerned, wired me up worse than any heroin dealer would ever. And the College of Physicians and Surgeons started an investigation on him. He immediately cut my prescription, and I had no means to support my habits. And so from a small town, a 40-minute ferry ride, within 6 weeks, I was down here learning to sling crack.
Heroin causes physical changes in the brain that lead to chemical dependence. If an addict doesn't shoot up at least twice a day, they go into withdrawal.
You dope sick right now?
Leanne runs into her friend Meg, who needs help shooting up.
Okay, Meg's dope sick, so she's got low blood pressure, right?
Dope sick means she's in withdrawal. Because she has low blood pressure, she can't find a vein to inject.
So I jug everybody.
Meg needs Leanne to jug her, or shoot heroin directly into her jugular vein.
Blah, blah, blah.
Physical symptoms of heroin withdrawal include severe muscle pain, vomiting, diarrhea, and in some cases, even death. Addicts will do anything for their next fix.
There you go. Thank you. But I was sitting in this alley, 10 years ago? And there was a girl so dope sick throwing up all over herself, and this girl would not help her unless she gave her $2. It's just gross what happens here. The most inhumane things. People falling asleep and their shoes being taken because somebody is dope sick and they need to sell the shoes.
By 11 a.m., Leanne escapes the chaos of the alleys and heads to Insight.
Heroin.
It's a government-run facility that provides users with clean needles and a safe place to shoot up. Heroin use is so risky because it's almost always injected. Sharing needles spreads HIV and other infectious diseases. The Insight project was set up in 2003 after Vancouver's downtown east side posted the highest rates of HIV in the Western world.
We didn't have Insight, we wouldn't have lives, right? This place does save lives.
Because it's injected, heroin's impact on the brain is extreme. Unlike other drugs that rely on snorting or smoking, heroin's effects are felt within seconds. It quickly crosses from the bloodstream into the brain, releasing huge amounts of dopamine, which trigger a euphoric state in the user. The high is intense, but the low that follows is unbearable.
It's like a mother's hug when you have it, but it's like a daddy smack in the head when you don't have it. It hurts when you don't have it. It's heroin, right?
Leanne prepares her heroin.
They call it the devil's dandruff. It's all evil.
She goes through the same routine every day.
And the golden liquid is John Travolta in Pulp Fiction, Train Spotting. Made it look real romantic. As far as I'm concerned, this still kills people. It's the very thing I need to live without being dope sick. We got it. And done.
As the heroin courses through her veins, Leanne descends into remorse.
This is a disease. It is not a moral decision. Addiction. I didn't grow at 12 years old, roll out of bed and say, I want to be a junkie.
The streets of Vancouver's downtown east side are flooded with high-grade heroin.
That's over $1,000 worth of dope right there.
And it's taken an epic journey to get here. Heroin begins its life as a beautiful flower, grown 7,000 miles away in places like Afghanistan's Helmand province. In Helmand province, poppy farmer Ahmed Ola harvests his crop. He scores the poppies so they bleed opium sap, the raw ingredient of heroin. Ahmed relies on the sale of his crop to feed the 18 members of his family through the long Afghan winter. A car arrives with a message. Envoys of a local warlord want to buy his opium. Two million people across the country are involved in the cultivation of opium poppies. More than 75% of the world's heroin supply originates here. The buyers inspect Ahmed's opium. Ahmed was hoping for $40 per kilo. Unfortunately for Ahmed, the buyer only pays $34 per kilo. The raw opium is taken to the home of Mansour Khan, a tribal leader who has his own personal militia. He's one of a group of drug warlords who control large areas of Afghanistan. Khan prepares to ship the opium to Iran, where it will be turned into heroin. His smugglers choose a crossing point in one of the Afghan provinces that border Iran. The terrain is dangerous, and there's constant threat of ambush by both the Allied forces and the Iranian military. The convoy suddenly stops when they're radioed by a scout on horseback. The spies have helped them avoid an ambush by the Iranian military. Producers in Iran and Afghanistan can use simple methods to process the opium into heroin. The lab isn't high-tech. First, the villagers use a wooden block and a car jack to press all the moisture out of the raw opium. The dry opium sap is heated in an iron cauldron with water and treated with a series of chemicals to produce the heroin. Then, all the moisture is pressed out of the mixture using a wooden plank. Finally, the heroin is dried out over a fire and tested. An Afghan farmer earns more than the average yearly wage by selling the opium needed to make just 1 kilo of heroin. By the time that kilo reaches America, it's worth $130,000.
زمونږ تقریبا 300 کورونه دي چې د هر و پسې یو لاس 12 نفره فامیل لري او د دې کوکنارو برکت دی چې دوی خپل زنونه او پسه.
The business of heroin production isn't just about feeding hungry farmers. Since 2005, the Taliban, the protectors and sponsors of Al-Qaeda, have skimmed more than $450 million in profits from the heroin business. Khan traffics his opium to international crime syndicates in Iran, who turn it into heroin and sell it for up to $5,000 a kilo.
مثلا مونږه دا د ایران د سرحد سره هلته خپل انډیوالان لرو خو بعضې وخت کې داسې هم پکې راځي چې زمونږ تلفات هم ورکوو هلته.
The border is fiercely guarded because Iran has the highest heroin addiction rate in the world. Camel caravans leave smugglers vulnerable to attack. This time, the smugglers aren't so lucky. The Iranians ambush them at the border. Lives are lost, and the shipment is seized. Last year, the Iranian authorities destroyed more than 16 tons of heroin and 400 tons of opium. But warlords like Khan are persistent. Afghan heroin is smuggled across so many different land borders, it's impossible to intercept every shipment. The drugs are trucked by international crime syndicates to Turkey. From there, they move to Holland, a major distribution point for Europe and the West. Rotterdam is the third largest port in the world. Its 25 miles of harbor handle over 1 million tons of cargo a day. But not all of it is legal. Officer Anno van Elsvik has one of the most difficult jobs in the port. He determines which ships to search for drugs.
Last year we had about 38,000 ships in the port of Rotterdam, so it's impossible to check them all.
The traffickers use ingenious methods to smuggle heroin.
They try to mislead us 1,000 ways, and it's our job to see what their new idea is of smuggling.
But Officer van Elsvik has a high-tech weapon in his arsenal. An X-ray machine so powerful, it can see through the steel walls of shipping containers.
We've got a container with flowers over here. We found heroin in the cabin of the truck. You can see a whole package of heroin, and it's about 60 kilograms.
Even though it fits into the cab of a truck, this 60-kilo load is worth $2 million on the street.
We see it as a game of cat and mouse. They try every time to think something new.
This time, it's only an exercise.
These are steel pipes. The sense of the drugs is on the pipes. We train the dogs with this kind of pipes. We put it everywhere, and the dog will find it.
Despite the Border Police's best efforts, 340 tons of heroin made it onto the world streets last year. But that's only one part of a vast supply. Perhaps to ensure prices remain high, traffickers have stockpiled 12,000 tons of opium. It's enough to keep the world's heroin addicts fixed for 2 years. The UN speculates that funding from this store of drugs may be used to finance terrorist attacks. This man, known by the alias JJ, is a heroin dealer. He's the bottom rung of the heroin retail trade. A dealer who sells heroin to support his own habit.
White kids, black kids, teachers, doctors, lawyers. Don't make no difference. I'll say it to your mama.
Heroin is up to 70% pure when it leaves the producer. But by the time it reaches JJ, it's been cut down several times.
It ain't never pure. By the time we get to Chicago, it's been stepped on down to 8 to 10 times. Then when you get it, you step on it. You look at about 15 to 20% pure. If that much. I can smell it. You know, like a dog smells something? You've been in the game long enough, you know how it smells. And different shades of color don't really make a difference.
JJ cuts his heroin with sleeping pills to increase its volume so he can make more money.
I'm putting my cut on this. This is one of my cuts. And make the dope last longer, make people come back for more.
Other dealers will often mix in anything at hand, including harmful brick dust, chalk, even rat poison.
See, I do my customers like it. If they say it's too weak, I gotta take less pills off. If they say it's too strong and it's holding them, I gotta ask them more. But now my money going up and down, up and down, up and down.
Each bag weighs around 1/10 of a gram. He'll sell them as $10 hits on the street. JJ gets paid $50 a day. His habit demands a relentless schedule.
It's 24/7, 365 days a year. Lose, you might win. Never know. It's a game. Ain't no happy ending. It's a journey.
JJ is part of a crew that operates in Chicago's West Side, a part of the city's 600,000 people call home. Poverty and crime blight the area. Rates of heroin addiction are high.
How you know what's up?
I need you soft.
JJ's boss, Stretch, has been on the street since he was a kid. His father was a crack addict, so Stretch had to fend for himself from an early age.
Thanks, baby.
When I sold my first bag, I was 12. We watched the older generation do it, so therefore the generation after them gonna do it. And who knows if the generation after us is gonna do it.
Stretch employs 42 people like JJ, divided into 7 crews around Chicago's West Side. He lives in constant fear of the police.
If you're doing what I'm doing, you're gonna worry about it. If you get caught with the right amount, a lot of jail time come behind it.
More than 10,000 people are serving jail time in Illinois for drug offenses, totaling nearly a quarter of the state's overall prison population. Stretch's crews work together to sell heroin and watch out for the cops.
I probably had like one person on one side of the street and another person that's walking in front of me. They're on security. They're watching my back right now, making sure don't no police and none ride up on me.
In a week, Stretch's dealers each sell about 7 grams, worth $700. But if the cops stop them, they won't find any drugs.
That's the #1 rule. You never carry nothing on you. Nothing at all.
Once a customer makes a buy, Stretch sends one of his crew members to fetch the drugs from a nearby hiding place. A different member takes the payment. Then the handover is made and the deal is done. With so much money changing hands, there's always a threat of violence from rival crews.
I'm putting my life on the line, trying to make money. There's a lot of shooting going on. You know what I mean? It could be somebody standing right next to you that you into it with, you won't even know it until the last minute, until they shoot you or something, you know what I mean? You're playing with your life, you're playing with death.
But for Stretch, the money from a good week makes it worth the risk.
I make a lot. I make a lot. About 17,000. I make a lot.
$17,000 a week is a fortune to Stretch, but for the big shots, it's chump change. Stretch buys from a mysterious Mr. Big, whose connections bring heroin into the city.
I'm pretty much a broker. Okay? Money comes, money goes. I don't count it.
A man using the alias Eugene is one of a handful of Chicago's heroin brokers. He buys directly from the traffickers and sells to dealers on the street.
Well, drugs come into the city by infrastructures that we all know. I mean, just like anything import or domestic gets to stores and things like that, that's the way drugs come into the city. They're just housed discreetly. Nothing special, nothing secret to it. Only thing that would be secret is who has it and who's moving it.
Eugene doesn't get his hands dirty unless it's to deliver punishment. For him, violence is a tool of the business.
There has been times where it's been handled violently when I have to regulate a situation where I'm not so diplomatic, where I have to threaten or act. A lot of times I don't do it myself. A lot of times I do it myself. Each makes a statement. When I do it myself, it makes a statement that I can or that I will. When I have someone else do it, it shows the extension of power.
Eugene likens his philosophy of drug dealing to an almost religious experience.
I'm pretty much the peacemaker, the keeper of flocks, kind of like a minister does in a church. You know how a minister can have thousands of people following him, not because he's paying them, just from the reverence alone. My reign is from reverence alone.
Eugene reigns over his drug-dealing family. He shows his love by keeping them supplied with high-grade heroin.
I can't save the world. If an addict wants to be an addict, they're going to be an addict. And they're going to get the drugs whether it's through you or around you. So let me ask you a question. If you had a brother, and your brother was an addict, you don't want him to get drugs at all. We know that. But if he must get drugs, get that drug from me, because I'm going to make sure that you're safe. I have an interest in you that nobody else has. That is my role in the environment.
Newark, New Jersey, 6 a.m. "100 of Newark's finest are gathering for Operation Four Seasons. The target? A major heroin market in a rundown housing project in North Newark.
Let's set up somewhere over in here.
The aim? To take out the boss and all his dealers simultaneously, and hit the stash house where the drugs are kept. Undercover officer, codenamed Chill, is leading the operation.
It's like a pharmacy. A lot of guns. This is really a bad spot.
The raid is part of Police Director Gary McCarthy's war on drugs.
The war on drugs absolutely can be won. Simply measuring arrests and seizures is not going to be an effective measure. On a national level, we should be looking at taking out large organizations that are limiting supply, but taking it from top to bottom, taking it all the way down to a street level, which is obviously something that's difficult to do.
In 2007, more than 1.8 million drug-related arrests were made in the U.S.
Nothing on you at all?
And America's prisons hold 500,000 drug offenders, more than any other country in the world. Drug abuse costs the U.S. economy more than $180 billion a year.
Put your hands up. All right.
Across America, entire neighborhoods are abandoned to dealers and drug users. In Newark, McCarthy's strategy is to flood the streets with police and take control of the drug-dealing neighborhoods to reduce crime for the residents of Newark.
Narcotics users, people who are addicted to narcotics, will commit burglaries. They will do robberies to obtain money to buy drugs. When they're under arrest for narcotics, they're not committing a burglary or a robbery.
After months of undercover police work, the trap is finally set.
I want to thank everyone for coming out this morning. My name's Vinny. I'm with DEA. The north end approach will be Vehicle 9 and go down North Cedar Lane and try and squeeze everybody towards the south. If you see runners, those are the people you want to grab.
Hitting this area just the way we've been hitting it, we really wasn't putting a dent. But being that we got multiple agencies involved, this operation is getting the bottom, the middle, and the top. The main thing that the director of the Newark Police Department is trying to do is once we establish it and we get it, we keep it.
The police will work with other professionals to help rebuild the community. But Chill's job is to first take down the bad guys.
Oh, we're going to get great satisfaction here because we're going to accomplish our task.
Chill calls in the SWAT team to raid the Kingpin's stash house.
Anywhere there's usually drug activity, there's a possibility of weapons. They go hand in hand in the U.S.
The SWAT team locks and loads. They're armed with military-style guns and body armor. Chill leads the team to the stash house.
Yeah, the whole crew gonna be behind us. We taking them in. We the generals.
I'm hoping to find Chill.
Tell them we in a black truck.
We're in a black truck. All perimeter teams, just stand by.
The perimeter teams wait for the signal.
Airwolf 1 coming into the area.
About 30 seconds away, all right?
Channel 1, all the units, converge, please.
The SWAT team goes in hard and fast.
North Police, search warrant!
The idea is to surprise the suspects before they can get rid of the drugs.
As we got to the second floor, the lady that was in there was in the bathroom. It appeared she had something in her mouth, but we couldn't prove that that was drugs at the moment. And right now, they're still searching for any illegal substances or weapons in the house right now.
Now it's time to take down the project's dealers.
They want their little change, bro.
Don't do that, do that.
But back at the stash house, there's a problem. The dog hasn't found any drugs.
I've been doing this so long till I used to be very discouraged, because sometimes you'll come here, you may get the big mother load. And then sometimes you come in with a big fat zero.
Chill does get one vital piece of information. Before the raid, the police only knew this dealer's street alias. Now, they have his real name.
As long as we get the one that actually doing the selling out of there, that will give us a more better positive results. Whether or not we got the drugs or not, at least we got him and take him out of the complex.
In Newark, property values are 30% below the state average. School dropout is double. For McCarthy, rehabilitation begins with isolating dealers and offering hope beyond drugs.
Narcotics is not the crime. You know, shootings, robberies, burglaries, those are the crimes. Narcotics is the problem. It's a social condition that needs to be corrected on a separate level.
Block by block, project by project, McCarthy is closing down the city's drug markets, trying to lift the shadow of drug-related crime in Newark.
My guys just saw you do a purchase, okay? Because right now you're under arrest.
You see me purchasing nothing.
Heroin addiction is the dark underbelly of American life. Addicts are targeted by cops and dismissed as criminal junkies by mainstream society. In Newark, addicts are locked up so they won't fund their habit through crime. But one man in Chicago is taking a different approach. Greg Scott, research director of the Chicago Recovery Alliance, sees the 50,000 addicts in his city not as criminals, but victims in need of medical treatment.
I specialize in going into homeless encampments, shooting galleries, crack houses, other areas where people are in their natural setting using their drugs.
Greg's day begins on the wrong side of the tracks. He heads to some of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods to help homeless addicts.
Joseph!
Opiates like heroin kill more people than any other narcotic, around 100,000 a year worldwide. Its victims die primarily from infection from dirty needles or overdose.
Yo!
Greg is trying to fight both.
I think all the kids is over here. Pop!
Bye, how you doing, man? I will retrieve, I'll pick up dirty syringes, whatever they may have to give me, and I distribute to them sterile syringes, clean paraphernalia. How you doing? Good, good.
Greg's not just handing out clean needles. He's also armed with a weapon that can combat overdose. The heroin antidote.
I also distribute to them Narcan, or naloxone, the generic name, which is the opiate antidote. It's an antagonist that reverses the effects of an opiate overdose, which for these folks is heroin. So we got a 10-shot vial, 10 milliliters, 10 shots. And then here's some muscle syringes so you don't have to go in the tongue.
Distributing naloxone like this isn't legal everywhere. Greg's group was the first to offer it free to addicts.
I've been doing heroin for 36 years. Prior to Narcan, we used to wrestle with the people, you know, try to keep them away. Some people just about literally almost beat them black and blue just so they wouldn't fall deeper into their nod, you know? Because once you get too far into it, you're dead.
Going on the nod means losing consciousness. But an overdose can take the nod too far, and the brain forgets to keep the body breathing. Thousands of people in the U.S. die from the effects of heroin every year.
No, I think it's Clyde. Oh, no, not yet.
Later in the day, Greg joins up with his mobile clinic to hand out clean needles and give free hepatitis vaccinations to addicts. Greg is part of the larger harm reduction movement that includes thousands of volunteers around the country.
Every year, we directly reach 12,000 injection drug users, and we reach another close to 30,000 through secondary exchange.
Yeah. Feel good. The methods of harm reduction are controversial. Greg's primary objective isn't to get users into addiction treatment. It's simply to teach them safer injection practices.
They're sort of surprised usually when they come on for the first time that we're not going to preach to them and tell them, you got to stop using. You know, we're not going to say, this is bad for you. They know it's bad for them. We're going to do 2 tests, hepatitis C and syphilis.
Greg's work is close to his heart.
I have a good deal of personal experience with drug abuse, drug addiction. And I have lost some of my dearest friends and some of my relatives to overdose.
The U.S. government spends less than a quarter of its drug control budget on treatment, and the ban on federal funding for needle exchanges has only recently been lifted. Most money is spent on law enforcement. Greg works late into the night.
I'm headed off to the west side of Chicago. There's a house there that you might call it a crack house, a shooting gallery. About 10 people live there on any given day. The number varies. And they've had probably 3 overdoses in the last 3 weeks, one of which was fatal.
Isn't that real hard to understand? If you're going to be in this house and you're going to shoot dope, you're all going to come in here and learn about this. It takes, what, 10 or 15 minutes of your time to save your goddamn lives.
Greg is fighting an uphill battle. Despite naloxone's life-saving benefits, addicts are reluctant to take anything that might rob them of their high.
Now this bottle is 10 doses, 10 lives. Now this bottle cost the needle exchange $2.67. To you it's free. Now think about this. Is your life worth 27 cents? I think it is.
Why do I worry about these guys so much? Why?
Crack cocaine addict Kat is in charge of the house. With so many drugs around, she doesn't want to risk the cops turning up to investigate an overdose death.
Sometimes it is a shooting gallery, and lately it has been. We have hookers, we have drug addicts, we have dope fiends, we have family. Kind of like United Nations. But people have been dying around me too much. They don't care about themselves when they're doing the heroin.
Because of Greg's outreach group, naloxone has saved 1,000 Chicago addicts from overdose.
You all right?
No, she's not all right.
Well, you're not really breathing right.
Greg's work soon takes an urgent turn.
You all right?
A prostitute from the crack house is overdosing.
Laura, I'm going to have to do it, Laura.
Just give it to her, Greg.
Don't put it...
Greg. Greg, she's been up
Laura,
for 3 days.
Falling out.
She's been up for 3 days. She
Laura,
just
I'm only going to give you a
it.
half cc.
Just give it to her.
Greg hits her with the heroin antidote.
We got a little Narcan, so it'll wake you up just enough to breathe.
Laura's had too much dope, and the antidote doesn't seem to be working.
Sit down right here. Sit.
Greg gives her another shot. The naloxone courses through her bloodstream and blocks the heroin's path to her brain,
Didn't want her
rendering it entirely harmless.
Come on.
Well, this is the 24th time that I've used Narcan on somebody. Addiction is a disease, and this is a manifestation of that disease.
I've never overdosed in 20
Really?
years.
You just had 2 shots of Narcan.
Well, I'm saying I would have slept for a while, but I wouldn't have died. I'm not going to come up with an excuse for using it.
Because you're doing it.
Right.
Okay, and that's okay. It doesn't make you a bad person. Just don't involve me in yourself doing yourself. When that last thing goes, they don't know if they're going to live or die. Greg's work is very good. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, well, Laura's alive, and it cost 27 cents.
Heroin is a destructive force, ripping apart the fabric of society. In Vancouver, hundreds of addicts are dying from HIV. In Chicago, drug-related murders happen nearly every day. The U.S. government treats heroin addiction as a law enforcement problem. But around the world, other governments treat it as a medical condition. Switzerland is one of the richest and most conservative countries in Europe. But during the 80s and 90s, Switzerland was in the grips of a heroin plague. In the capital Bern, drug-related crime was through the roof. Heroin was a national disgrace.
I used to live right next to that needle park. It was horrible. People died there. There was petty crime all around in the city. It was just totally out of hand. It was a terrible situation.
In response to public outcry, the government comes up with a solution beyond clean needles and drug counseling. A revolutionary program that offers free heroin to addicts who meet certain criteria and have a doctor's prescription. And it's all courtesy of the Swiss taxpayers. Dr. Christoph Berkey is part of the radical experiment. His clinic in Bern is one of 23 centers around the country that dispense heroin-like medicine.
So this is where we keep the heroin. It comes in those 10 grams ampules that will later on be dissolved with sterile water.
Every patient in this clinic receives a controlled dose of pharmaceutical-grade heroin.
And as you can see, it's a transparent, clear fluid. It's nothing compared to that soup-like consistency of the street heroin in a syringe. Here it's 100% pure heroin.
Before Berkey's clinic, heroin addiction forced his patients into a life of crime, prostitution, and homelessness. They were disconnected from medical services and addiction treatment.
The type of patient we have in this clinic is a different one. It's a patient that we normally don't get in touch with. They were out on the street, but we didn't really get in touch with. We couldn't really integrate them into a treatment. Now here it's possible. They do come every day.
Karen has turned her life around, thanks to her commitment to this radical program.
Seit ich hier bin, hat sich mein Leben sehr verbessert, nur zum Positiven. Durch das, dass ich komme zwar zweimal hier hin, bin in diesem Sinn auch festgebunden an etwas, aber ich habe den Rest von meinem Leben, also von der Zeit, kann ich arbeiten, ich kann Hobbys haben, ich kann Freundschaften pflegen. Ja. Eben Zeit, die ich vorher nicht hatte für das.
Dr. Berkey has no illusions about why his patients come to him.
They come to me because I or my team provides them with the heroin. But through that contact, we can start making other things an issue. We can start working really on mental health issues as well as on other issues in their life. And that's the core value of heroin prescription. It's incredible, and I like it every day. You get in touch with people through this type of treatment that before that in the professional field we did not get in touch with. So this is absolutely fascinating.
The free heroin program may be controversial, but there's been a 60% drop in felonies committed by its patients since it began, and the overall societal cost per addict has been cut in half. The program doesn't solve every problem, but it does reduce the impact of some of Switzerland's most troubled addicts. The heroin trade funds terrorism, international crime, and domestic gangsters.
Police, search warrant!
While destroying millions of lives. Still, there are more than 11 million heroin users worldwide. And society foots the bill for the destruction left behind.